Hello, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War Frontline update for the 2nd of April 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. I have just come off the back of recording an interview with Silicon Curtain, Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain, so keep your eyes posted for his output on the channel Silicon Curtain. I am interviewing him as a return favour on Thursday in a live interview, so check us out then and see what we have to say to each other. It's a really great conversation we just had. Could have gone on forever, but alas, he keeps his to an hour, so lots packed in hopefully for you guys. Won't be anything you haven't heard from me anyway, but anyway, please support his efforts. Now, you can see there are no changes to the front line in the northeastern axis, Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna. Just to let you know that, as you've heard from my recent hits and losses videos for the first news video in the morning, there have been huge numbers of Russian equipment being lost as they have attacked in a number of places and had those attacks repelled. Novomykhailivka down here, Avdiivka over here, Bakhmut here, and even Terny and Torska, they have just lost phenomenal numbers of pieces of equipment. And that is a good sign for the Ukrainians, which means that even though they are struggling for ammunition, resources, even boots on the ground, they're still able to repel Russian attacks, and very large Russian attacks. I think we are seeing, well, as I said earlier today, it's not that we're seeing the newly procured artillery ammunition filtering through to the Ukrainian front lines. It's that they know that that's coming, and so therefore are much freer in their use of stockpiled ammunition that they were rationing for a rainy day. Well, that rainy day is here, and they're using it because they know they're going to get some others. So I've seen a lot of cluster munitions being used. I've seen artillery ammunition being used, javelins as well, interestingly, and of course mines taking their toll, as well as the usual drone activity. And the Ukrainians used a lot of drones yesterday, more so according to the open source data than the Russians, and I think the Russians are really feeling the pressure, feeling the effects of the Ukrainians doing a good job of defending. That's not to say they're finding it tough. The Ukrainians will be losing personnel themselves, and they are in desperate straits in a number of places on the front line, but I think they're also doing a pretty good job of defending given their famous shortages. Right, Kupiansk, reporting from Ukraine, had a video whereby he detailed the Ukrainians counterattacking in the Sinkivka area and retaking some ground north of the town of Sinkivka. We have seen that in a change to the map somewhat recently, I think. I don't know if he's talking about that or whether there's been further counterattacks that have pushed the Russians even further back from here. We know, well, there is some speculation, so we don't know actually, some speculation that the Russians may have pulled some troops from the Sinkivka Kupiansk area and down to the Terny Torska salient, and that would indicate that the Russians don't have strength and depth, although there are these consistent claims that they've got 100,000 troops operating in the Luhansk area, and that the Russians are getting ready to attack in a major offensive at Kupiansk, in a major offensive at Liman, in a major offensive here, there and everywhere. It never quite materializes, although there is that risk that it could happen going forward at any point, but it doesn't look like the Russians are having too much joy in this northeastern sector. The Ukrainians have done a good job to defend against them, and it looks like this is one of the most stabilized areas of the front line. Fingers crossed, you're only as good as your last day, your last week, and that could of course change. Things are dynamic in wars to some degree, and then stabilize and positional and unmoving to others. So anyway, activity still taking place, I would have thought, in the Terny Torska area. I'm not going to go granular. It's going to be a fairly quick run through today. I'm not going to the Institute for the Study of War for their granular daily report, but nonetheless, no changes around the Seversk, the Liman direction Seversk area, and indeed Chaziv Yar, Ivaniska. This is really good news. There have been these rumors that Ukraine are going to be pushed out of Ivaniska fully and then eventually out of Chaziv Yar at some point. I'm interested to see how much the Ukrainians cling on to Chaziv Yar, how much they defend it, or whether they will pull back to a greater area of defensive quality, maybe some fortifications that have been built behind Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar's fairly well defended because the Ukrainians have had a long time to sit in there as Bakhmut was taken, and it was expected that Chasiv Yar would be next. And so there's this idea that Chasiv Yar really could hold out for a long time. But then speaking to people like Greg and speaking to who has himself spoken to battalion commander in this area, the Ukrainians are supposedly ready to pull back from there if needs be, and he's expecting, Greg was saying he's expecting the Ukrainians to lose Chasiv Yar at some point going forward. Now that could be the summer, it could be quite a long way away, but don't expect them to hold on to Chasiv Yar in the same way they kind of bled the Russians in Bakhmut. Because the Ukrainians might just not have the numbers of personnel until they do a larger mobilization, which is, always on the cards. So we hear. Right, no changes around the Klishchiivka, Kurdyivka area south of Bakhmut, and indeed nothing until we get down to southern Avdiivka salient, where it's all about Tonyenka again, and this is according to Surat maps that the Russians have pushed further on. Andrew Perpetua, interestingly, has some agreement with what Surat maps had previously said, that the Russians now control some area to the west of Tonyenka, further to what they did have. As I've said many a time, Surat maps will be very overzealous in what the Russians control. As soon as they see the Russians at a point on the map with mechanized equipment or even human beings, they'll say, right, Russia controls that. So here, this is unlikely that Russia controls this. This is much more likely that Surat maps has seen evidence that Russia has had an attack in that area, and that attack could well have been repelled, and they go back and lick their wounds. But what usually happens, like has happened here, is that this happens, and then they try again, and eventually they do take the area, and then Surat maps feels vindicated for being correct, except they weren't correct at the time. It was subsequent correctness that happens. It's confirmed, but 3-4 days later, or whatever, as they grind away at these attacks, grind. But Tonyenka has been incredibly painful for the Russians, as according to the data that I've shown you over the last few days. Surat maps here saying that, as you can see, Tonyenka, some moves there, and a little bit of movement further to the south, north of Vodyanye and north of Pervomaisky. The Russian army continues advancing west of Tonyenka, and the Ukrainian army has been forced to retreat to the other shore of the Derna River from this axis. In addition, following the recent capture of Vodyanye, Russian troops began advancing north of the locality, while Ukrainian forces began a withdrawal and headed to the east, where the trench system is located. So this is the idea that, and Andrew Perpetua is talking about this, how using the gains, I think he was talking about this, using the gains in Pervomaisky to then move into this area and fill in this space between the watercourse there and the Derna River that, as you know by now, comes down from Badichi in the north, around here, and then to the west. The higher ground here allows the Ukrainians to have a good defensive position, and the trouble would be if the Russians actually got across the river, as Surat maps has claimed, to the west of Orlivka. I don't know if they've actually done that, though. I doubt it. But yes, it seems that the Russians are trying to fill in this area of land between those two watercourses. No report says, despite huge losses, which is what we keep saying and seeing, Russia did manage to take up new positions west of Tonyenka and cross the pond, crossing near Semenivka. The latter is significant, creating a bridgehead behind the newly created Ukrainian line of defense. So this is important because if we go back to the map here, this is the idea that they have crossed at Semenivka, as according to no reports. That would be a huge worry if that is indeed the case. So I'd like to see in a couple of days whether that's still the case, and if it is, then that's a problem for the Ukrainians going forward, because that river has then been as mentioned, crossed. Now, some incredible footage of this I probably can't show you, but this is a hammer or a JDAM that lands right next to a Russian position in the village of Tonyenka. And you see, look, as I forward the video on, you see it coming down here and then hitting and exploding, and that's in Tonyenka. I don't know if that's been geolocated at all. It doesn't look like it, at least from that source, but That's interesting because we are starting to see, and this is the same in a number of places on the front line, the Ukrainians utilizing their own guided glide bombs, and that's hitting Russian positions in key areas like Avdiivka. So it's like, well, you can do that, we can do that too. And that again could be why we've seen, big losses, and why we've seen the Ukrainians, not so much the big losses, but why we've seen the Ukrainians stabilize areas of the front line compared to what it was maybe 2 weeks ago. So we're seeing more use of ammunition, artillery ammunition, but also those 50 hammers that are turning up every month that the French are providing to the tune of 600, so 50 over 12 months. 50 a month over 12 months. We're starting to see those being used in a number of places. Also, JDANs supposedly being used, so the American versions of those being used in places. So Krinky, well, not Krinky, the Dnipro River, the Ukrainians are using these guided glide bombs and here on the front line. So I think that's significant and it helps the Ukrainians to keep the Russians at bay, to hammer the Russians with more sizable weapons in the same way that Russians were doing to the Ukrainians. And in doing so, were able to move forward. The Ukrainians didn't have much to say about that. Really good news to see them using those munitions. That's actually down in Uruzhany. We'll come to that later. So this is Tonyenka again, and this is a javelin being used. And this is an interesting bit of footage, not so much because they used a javelin, well, whoop-de-doo. So you've got this guy to the left here using a javelin, but I want you to see, and JR pointed this out to me, this is just a good idea of the topography of the area. So you have quite a good view. I mean, it's not very good resolution to this, but you've got quite a good view downhill. I assume crossing the Derna River if this is the sort of Tonyenka, and then across into the Tonyenka area. So you can fire these javelin, as you can see at speed across there. It then hits whatever it is over there, some mechanized piece of equipment. Let's assume the javelin has a range of sort of 5 kilometers. You can use that and have the height advantage in using that. So that's 200 meters there, down to in Tonyenka being 183, 190, depending on where you're, 176, 180, and here 200 meters or so. So that is, 4.8 kilometers. So that's a perfect range for a javelin to hit one of these vehicles advancing in that sector. So Ukrainians using a variety of ordnance. I showed you on this morning's hits and losses segment that Andrew Perpetua, with his loss stats, showed a variety of different things blowing up Russian equipment, including a number of javelins being used. So that's good news for the Ukrainians, that maybe they've got a stockpile of javelin missiles that have come in. Maybe it's just, I don't know, anomalous, but nonetheless, they do appear to be using them a little bit more. And then as we come down south, you can see no changes to Mariinka, no changes to the Krasnohorivka area or Novomirkilivka, and that's super important in my books. This has been the area that the Ukrainians have been the most challenged, I think, and that will probably continue. It's just today there were no changes there, or that at least not when JR did the mapping. There could well be now. We come to the west a little bit. We come to Staromorska and Uruzhany. If you remember here, there's this river that meanders its way down to Staromilnyivka here. So Uruzhany should be here. There it is. Bit of footage coming out from there. No report saying in the area of Uruzhany, units of the 58th Motorized Brigade struck a group of Russians attempting to attack Ukrainian positions with cluster munitions and grenades dropped from drones. So that's important because cluster munitions are being used. So they appear to be confident to use them because they'll get some more of them, or they'll get more artillery ammunition in general. But also, it's the idea that they use them in unison with drones. Drones are becoming a more and more established part of the combined arms maneuvers we're seeing. So drones interact with troops on the ground. They interact with vehicle attacks. You might sometimes have a drone operator inside a tank or an IFV. That's how much they're becoming integrated into activities here, and working indeed with artillery to hit, in this case, Russian troops attacking. No changes to Robotina and no changes to the Dnipro front line. But my goodness, there's a lot of footage out there of destroyed Russian equipment. As I said, Bakhmut has seen some, as well as Terni and Torska. Novomykhailivka today as well, footage coming out of there of a lot of destroyed Russian equipment. So it is, really challenging for the Russians. But nonetheless, of course, obviously challenging for the Ukrainians. I forgot to say, Bodanivka, Chasiv Yar, no reports reported yesterday, further up, to Bakhmut area. Russia took control over a trench network east of Chasiv Yar. This area was able to be taken over due to gains inside Ivaniska, making sure the flanks were covered. The Ukrainians expect and is prepared for a push into Chasiv Yar, a key battle to come. And that's kind of talking about how, Chasiv Yar might well fall at some point if they are expecting a big battle there. But actually no changes since that mapping update from no reports, at least that I'm aware of at the moment. Anyway, that's the end of today's videos. Thank you very much for watching. Really appreciate your support. Please like, subscribe and share. And if you do subscribe, make sure you click on the bell icon and select all instead of personalized, and that means you get notifications of stuff. I know it's quite hit and miss. People don't get notifications of my stuff. I get an awful lot of people complaining that I'm censoring them by deleting their comments. I'm not deleting comments. I don't have time to do that. The comments are being deleted on both sides of the fence by YouTube. They seem to have arbitrary reasons for deleting, criteria for deleting comments, and they are very heavy-handed with that. So that is not me, so stop accusing me of censoring your comments. That's mainly Russians doing that. Anyway, or pro-Russians. Anyway, thank you again. Take care. Speak soon.